thousands of years, the first cataract on the Nile marked Egypt's southern boundary. Beyond stretches Nubia, a region coveted by the pharaohs of all dynasties, including Ramses II, the most famous ruler of them all. Nubia, ethereal flesh of the gods, realm of gold, land of copper and diorite mines. A world of rock and sand, inhabited by creatures molded by the gods of the wind. Mysterious and fascinating Nubia, African land, crossed by caravans carrying ivory and ebony for powerful Egypt's temples and palaces over 3,000 years ago. What was the ancient region of Nubia is today southern Egypt and a major part of southern Sudan. For 15 centuries, from the New Kingdom to the Ptolemaic period, prior to the birth of Christ, the pharaohs built countless temples and chapels on the banks of the Nile. In 1960, the construction of the Aswan High Dam and the creation of Lake Nasser meant these monuments would be permanently submerged. A major international operation headed by UNESCO led to a last-minute rescue which saved almost all of Egypt's temples from the waters. As we embark on a cruise aboard the Nubian Sea, we invite you to penetrate the secrets of the mysterious Nubian temples and discover the amazing story of how they were salvaged. Aswan is no doubt one of the most beautiful towns in the Nile Valley. Though it has grown since the dam was built, now ranked as the third largest city in Egypt after Cairo and Alexandria, numbering 500,000 inhabitants, it's managed to preserve its provincial quiet and character. No bridges cross the wide and peaceful Nile, and so vessels ply the waters in both directions. Ferries, cruisers, and the famous feluccas, one-sail vessels whose elegant silhouette has become the city's trademark. Once a simple means of transportation, today the feluccas are only used for carrying tourists, an excellent source of income for their owners who take great care of them.
قلب يا لك يا راجل تعبان ابو قالتو ما يبتاس فوز الله فوز الملك هو صاحي فوز الله انت كده صاحي راي سالا ما اخذ خفتك فوزي قلنا اساسا افتكر ايه صاحب من الدهنت ها وده دور بيت لا والله
In ancient days, Aswan was already a powerful trading crossroad on the routes to Africa and India. It's an ethnic crossroads as well, though Arabized for years. The dark-skinned Nubian people more resemble tribes from the Blue Nile in Ethiopia rather than the Saharan-featured Egyptians. The Nubians are proud of this cultural and ethnic difference and still speak Kamusi and Mahasi, variations of their ancestral language. We wanted to learn more about the Nubians and their difference and followed Ibrahim, a young felucca skipper on the lookout for customers in the Aswan docks. Following the Nile upstream, he takes us to his village located on the island of Sahel.
We've done this kind of work for years. It's handed down from father to son. We Nubian people enjoy it. It's quiet out here. There's no noise. And we're able to be in contact with good customers. We earn a good living, thank God.
Since 7 years, Ibrahim leaves Sahel at dawn on board his felucca. He has to arrive at Aswan before the heat of the day if he wants to find some tourists to take out. Like his 6 brothers and sisters, some of whom are married, he lives with his parents. The weight of tradition and paternal respect override any form of emancipation.
I have lived here for 63 years, and my father and grandfather lived on the island of Sahel too. This place has been our whole life for 2,000 years.
Vibrant color is the norm in Nubia, as seen on the painted fronts of the unfired brick houses and the women's clothing.
First of all, we Nubians only marry one woman, whereas the Egyptians have 4 or 5. We have a reputation for being honest and decent and telling the truth. We are really different from the Egyptians.
The difference fades at mealtime, as the men are served in the shady indoor courtyard while the women eat in the kitchen. Nonetheless, the Nubians cut fine figures in their colorful crocheted caps or large white turbans worn nowhere else in Egypt. Upstream from the island of Sahel stands the old Aswan Dam. Built by the British at the turn of the century to control the Nile's floodwaters, the 2-kilometer-long granite dam formed a huge reservoir of water covering Nubia nearly 8 months of the year. And so visitors to the temples on the island of Philae have got to go by boat. In the early 60s, the government decided to build the high Aswan Dam to meet water supply needs. The new reservoir would submerge all of the Nubian villages and temples. A huge work project began under the patronage of UNESCO, as well as a race against the clock. At Philae, the island was surrounded by a double sheet pile wall to keep it watertight. The temples were divided into 45,000 blocks, several tons in weight, carried several hundred meters to the leveled island of Agilkia to offer the same relief as the original site. Once the contents were removed, the island was abandoned to the lake waters. Rebuilt in a record 30 months and inaugurated on March 10, 1980, Philae was the last temple to be saved, putting the final touches on 20 years of pharaonic work. Philae was dedicated to the goddess Isis. Under the reign of the last pharaohs in the 4th century BC, the Isis cult took firm hold at a later date. She was the wife of Osiris, god of the dead and mother of Horus, symbol of the struggle between good and evil, and became the archetype goddess figure. The The Temple of Isis, dominating the other monuments on Philae, is one of the better preserved structures in Egypt. The building follows the traditional layout of major temples from the New Kingdom period. An 18-meter-high pylon stands at the entrance, and the facade is decorated with gigantic reliefs depicting Pharaoh offering prisoners as sacrifice or gifts to the divine triad, Isis, Hathor, and Horus. In 300 AD, Emperor Theodosius ordered all pagan temples in Egypt closed, but Philae continued to flourish. For nearly 2 centuries, Nubian pilgrims came to lay offerings to the great Isis and engraved prayers on the sanctuary walls. The last hieroglyphic texts were engraved at Philae in 473 AD. In 551, Justinian closed the temple permanently, and shortly afterward the Christians turned the hypostyle hall into a church. The history of the Old Cataract Hotel, with its Victorian facade and Moorish decor, is intertwined with the history of the British occupation of Egypt. This was the era of the steamer hotels, sailing up the Nile, and royal festivities. Winston Churchill, Nicholas II, the last Russian Tsar, the rulers of Egypt, and the upper crust sat on the hotel terrace and admired the feluccas gliding on the Nile in the warm light of the setting sun. At nightfall, the Aswan bazaar comes alive with jovial, colorfully dressed crowds. When the High Aswan Dam was built, 100,000 Nubians were evacuated from the flooded zones. Some 30,000 went to Khartoum and Sudan. Others settled voluntarily or by force in Egypt on plots of land donated by the Egyptian government, or became waiters or bawab, doorman, in Cairo. The remainder stayed in Aswan. They make up an integral part of the bazaar, working at countless odd jobs that add to its charm. One of the most amazing is the ironer, who uses his foot on the case iron appliance.
صور البخار.
Just as we experienced on the island of Sahel when we visited Ibrahim's village, our last stroll in the streets of Aswan leaves us with heady sensations of vivid colors and the mixture of African and Oriental fragrances.
That is black datli made in Aswan. This is very, very strong. That is datli in Sudan, is not strong. That is datli in Nubis.
We are now aboard the Nubian Sea, which cruises on Lake Nasser beyond the high Aswan Dam. The Nubian Sea originally sailed on the Nile between Luxor and Aswan. The boat had to cross both Aswan dams to get to the lake. The vessel is split into two parts and set on rubber cylinders. Meter by meter, the two sections are raised above the obstacle, lowered in the same fashion to the level of the lake, then put back together. Since this exploit, Nubia was open to tourists and a shipyard was built on the right side of the dam.
Personally, I had not been back to my country since 1964. So when the cruises started 3 years ago, it was an opportunity for me to make a little pilgrimage back to my native land.
When the rescue operation was underway, the idea of a cruise on Lake Nasser to explore the Nubian temples was unimaginable. Authorities decided to relocate the temple of Kalabsha near the high dam and therefore make access to the site easier.
This temple was originally located 50 kilometers to the south. Kalabsha is the name of the temple today, but in the Greco-Roman period it was called Talmis.
We follow our guide Mohammed into a huge courtyard encircled by columned porticos where worshippers could access during major festivals. Kalabsha was situated within a 120-kilometer expanse inside northern Nubia. Here the Ptolemies had assembled the cult centers attached to the domain of Isis at Philae. But the temple of Kalabsha is dedicated to Mandokis, a local god, depicted wearing a diadem. The Egyptians identified him with Horus. We leave the tiny temple at Kertasi, dedicated to Isis, and head for Bet El Wali, a hemispius, in other words, a temple partly built inside the rock face and partly built on the outside. It dates back to Ramses's youth. Visitors can admire the splendid polychromatic reliefs depicting the young pharaoh exchanging with the deities. Ramses receives the key of life and divine breath from Khnum, ram-headed god of fertility. Further along, he makes a wine offering to Horus, son of Isis, and Osiris, whom he personifies on earth. Finally, Ramses nurses at the breast of the goddess Isis, a tender way of affirming his equal stature with the gods. Leaving the promontory at Kalabcha behind, we sail southwards. The sun is still below the horizon when the boat drops anchor near Wadi El Sibwa. We follow our guide Mohammed to the top of the mound overlooking the site, just in time to see the sun emerge over Lake Nasser. Like Re, creator of the universe, emerging from the primeval waters. The legend goes that the sun is reborn each morning in the form of the scarab Khepri. At its zenith at noon, it becomes Hor Akhti, the falcon-headed triumphant sun. Deserted by human beings in the 20th century, this corner of Nubia has once again become the land of the gods of ancient Egypt, one of which was the scorpion. We are now 160 kilometers south of the High Dam at the site where a group of temples were moved in the 60s. You can only reach the Temple of Dhaka by boat, originally 40 kilometers to the north. This temple from the Ptolemy period was built by King Ergamen, descendant of the Black Pharaohs who conquered Egypt in the 8th century BC. When they returned to Ethiopia to the kingdoms of Napata or Meroe, they brought the ancient Egyptian culture to the heart of Africa and even built pyramids. The temple is dedicated to Tot, the baboon, god of intelligence. In this relief, Tot attempts to bring Sekhmet, the lioness nicknamed the Distant One, back to Egypt, after her father Re, creator of the universe, sent her to Nubia to destroy the human beings who showed no appreciation of his kindness. In this allegorical scene, the return of the Distant One, charmed by Tot, actually symbolizes the Nile's beneficial floodwaters. For thousands of years, until the High Dam was built and Lake Nasser was created, the Egyptians waited expectantly for the nourishing floodwaters. The Nile Valley, where most farmland is concentrated, only accounts for 1% of the country's total surface area. The remainder is an immense desert of sand and rock, which caravans cross on their way to and from Sudan.
تراو طبعا ايه بناجي بناخد ايه في السكة بنبيت يوم.
We come from the south, near Abu Simbel. We're headed for Darao, north of Aswan. We follow the trail. We've already walked all night to get here, then we'll go on to Aswan. It'll take us about 6 days and 6 nights to go from Aswan to Darao. We generally walk from 6 in the morning to 10 or 11 at night every day.
ولحد حوالي الساعة 11 أو 10 بالليل.
Though critics of the high dam say that it has made the riverbanks poorer by removing the silt, it has brought electricity to thousands of villages and has increased farm production because the main stream is kept under control. Nubia, however, does not apparently enjoy these benefits. Despite water from the lake, peasants here need a will of steel to survive. Wadi el-Sibua is one of the many Nubian temples from Bet el-Wali to Abu Simbel, which bear the mark of Ramses II. Wadi el-Sibua, the Valley of the Lions, reminds us that in the days of the Pharaohs there were still many lions in Egypt. In primitive times, shrines were built in their honor, near the weds where the wild animals came to drink. Apparently, even the Egyptians often tamed these creatures, such as Ramses II, who made them his war companions. As the Sphinx or the lion, the symbol of strength, the pharaoh could watch over the sanctuary. After passing the pylon at the entrance to the temple, we reach a courtyard adorned with statues of Osiris, symbol of the afterlife, bearing Ramses's features. When Egypt was Christianized in the early centuries AD, the temples were naturally turned into churches. At Wadi el-Sibua, in the tiny Pharaos, a sanctuary carved inside the rock face, the reliefs depicting the ancient deities apparently better weathered the test of time than the faces of the saints painted on the walls. We leave Wadi el-Sibua and continue southward. We approach the riverbanks. There's no clue where we'll dock next, not even a mountain. On the bridge, the instruments seem only to serve as decoration. The Rais, the boat captain, who had sailed in this area before it was submerged, relies on his experience.
Before, the Nile was just a narrow passageway for boats, right where the lake is now. People lived on both sides. There are many little villages on the right, on the left, all over. Life was carefree here. As soon as the work on the dam began, this widened little by little. Then all the villages were covered by water and the lake took over the valley. But the authorities had moved the inhabitants to Aswan before.
Once again, thanks to the ship's shallow draft, the Rais brings the vessel close to the banks, almost fitting the bow perfectly into the rocks. Fishermen from some village somewhere throw their nets into the bluish water.
يا عيد عشان كله ده عشان نطلع في التلفزيون احنا.
Lake Nasser is overrun with fish such as the bolti, a species of giant carp. These fish are not the only ones to take advantage of the lake. Crocodiles have also reappeared here. These reptiles have completely disappeared from the Nile, at least in Egypt, but now back on the banks of the countless creeks bordering the lake. The Temple of Amada soon appears near the bank. These are the ruins of a peripteral temple which Thutmose III built 3,500 years ago in honor of Amon-Re. Apart from the huge stele engraved with magnificent blue-encrusted hieroglyphics, the naos walls are covered with polychromatic reliefs recounting the story of the foundation of the temple. We see Pharaoh in Amon's presence, busy with the construction, using instruments to find the proper position in relation to the North Star. The naos in the Temple of Amada was not cut into pieces during the rescue operation because of its delicate decor and its size. Though it weighed 900 tons, it was raised from the ground and set atop a car on a railway track. It took 3 months to cover a distance of 2,600 meters to the new location, 65 meters higher up. The guard's song, accompanied by a semsemia, a five-stringed lyre, supposedly evokes the memories of the lost villages and submerged houses. The frescoes on the walls of the temple of Dare tell older stories like the one about the sacred tree whose leaves symbolize the millions of years of life the pharaoh was granted. Or the story about the sacred bark with its dark-skinned rowers kneeling at the bow. Perhaps they represent the Nubian ancestors of the men who today guard the vestiges of the lost country. We've covered 230 kilometers since we left Aswan. During the New Kingdom, the region over which we are now sailing was governed by the Viceroy of Kush, the province located between the Second and Fourth Cataracts. The Pharaohs built a number of fortresses here so they could keep watch over this essential communications route linking Black Africa to the Mediterranean. Ksar Ibrim is one of these forts. The cliff of Ksar Ibrim, only the top of which emerges from the waters, once dominated the Nile Valley. Ksar Ibrim was occupied by the Ptolemies, the Romans, and even the Mamelukes, and until the 16th century, a cathedral stood at the summit. In the mid-15th century, Nubia became Muslim, and the cathedral was turned into a mosque. The site was abandoned in 1812. Aswan is now 280 kilometers behind us to the north, while Sudan lies 40 kilometers to the south. Our cruise on Lake Nasser is coming to a close, but we all know that that the best is yet to come. Our eyes search the riverbanks and scrutinize the horizon. The moment we've been waiting for is here. Abu Simbel looms ahead of us. The work to save Abu Simbel began in 1965 when it became evident the site would be in danger from the rising waters. The two temples, namely the four columns representing Ramses II, were sawed in over 1,000 pieces, some weighing several tons each. The stone on the cliff's surface was also removed so that the original site could be completely reconstructed. French Egyptologist Christine Desroches-Noblecourt initiated the UNESCO-backed crusade to save the Nubian temples. She salutes the work of 1,700 laborers, most of whom were Nubians, commenting, "The men who worked at Abu Simbel labored for the imperishable. They taught us a valuable lesson, and the source is not exhausted. We must keep it going." Each large block was numbered, cautiously removed, and taken to its final destination, 64 meters above the original location. In 1968, only 3 years after the project began, the Abu Simbel temples were fitted into an artificial mountain, offering the same view and position as the cliff chosen nearly 3,000 years ago by Ramses II himself. The great temple of Abu Simbel is the work of a pharaoh at the height of his power. The temple was meant to glorify Ramses II, not any of the gods. 4 royal colossi 20 meters high show him sitting on the throne. Before visitors enter the sanctuary, they receive the underlying message: Pharaoh is the temple, and the temple is Pharaoh. However, Ramses II could not completely ignore the gods, and so he dedicated a small section in the middle of the facade to Re Horarte, the sun at its zenith personified as a falcon-headed man. Nestled at the feet of the colossal figures are tiny statues of Ramses II's family. His mother Tui, his wife Nefertari, and his children. Once again, we follow our guide Mohammed for an early morning visit to the great temple before the crowds arrive. The guard opens the door to the sanctuary with a huge key in the shape of an ankh, the emblem symbolizing life. The sun rays inside the temple illuminate the colossal statues representing Osiris, god of the dead, with the face of the pharaoh holding a scepter and a flail. The walls of the pronaos are all decorated with reliefs glorifying Pharaoh. Are they simple allegories of the all-powerful leaders and the victorious warrior, or are they scenes depicting historical events? Of all the wars that took place during the long reign of Ramses II, the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites is by far the most famous and most controversial. Though often related as a victory on the temple walls, there was no victor nor defeated at Kadesh. Inside the hypostyle hall, the emphasis on Ramses II diminishes. Instead of battle descriptions, the walls are painted with scenes of offerings to the gods. Traditional liturgical scenes, such as the transport of the sacred bark, can be seen in the vestibule before arriving at the Holy of Holies. We finally enter the sanctuary, 65 meters from the entrance, in the heart of the mountain. 4 seated statues are carved into the rock. Re Horarte, the sun at its zenith, Ramses II, Amon-Re, and Ptah, god of the darkness. The entrance to the temple evokes the same notion. Ramses II is on equal footing with the gods. When Ramses II first saw the Abu Simbel site, with the 2 knolls in pink sandstone, a bare 50 meters apart, he took it as a sign from the gods and decided to build 2 temples here. The smaller one is dedicated to his beloved wife, Nefertari. The great royal wife bears the features of Hathor, goddess of love, who gives birth to the sun every morning. Night has fallen on Abu Simbel. On the bridge, the crew begins singing Nubian songs, bringing the cruise to a close. Several meters away, the enigmatic colossal figures at Abu Simbel emerge from the shadows. Like radiant beacons of light, they stand watch for eternity over the submerged souvenirs of ancient Nubia.